Our current guest is an executive vice president for Infinity3. He's had a wealth of experience from chief strategist in cybersecurity firms, consulting director for Forrester, director of an ITSM practice at BMC, as well as tenure at HP, which tends to be a common theme amongst our guests. Welcome to Ticket Volume, news and information for improving IT experiences, powered by InvGate. David Cannon, welcome to Ticket Volume.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.
I appreciate you making the time to have a quick discussion. And we had a chance to catch up because we were both at Support World Live recently, and it was great to catch up with you. I think one of the topics that I've heard people talking, and maybe they've been talking about it in hushed tones, I don't really know, but people have been talking about how ITIL v4, whether it's keeping up with market pace or not. What's your take on that?
It depends what market pace you're looking at. So I think that ITIL 4 has done a really good job capturing some of the leading practices within leading organizations around the world. This focus on more strategic aspects of service management, this growing integration between the development side, the operations side, and the business side, all coming together to focus on value. And I think ITIL 4 really reflects a lot of that. Mm-hmm. We should never forget, ITIL reflects where the industry is at a particular time. It's not a framework in the sense that it tells you everything you should do. It just reflects where the industry is at the time. And I think ITIL 4 has done a great job of reflecting where many of the leading organizations are who are using digital technology to run their businesses. And I think it's done really well at that. Now, is everybody there? No, not everybody is there. There's still many of us that are focusing on the age-old issue of how do I speak to development teams. There are others who are saying, how do I align what happens in my data center with what happens in my business units? There's still many organizations that are having those discussions. And, I think ITIL 4 represents the leading where the industry is. But I think there are many groups that are still busy looking at the way that practices were depicted in ITIL version 3 or ITIL version 2.
Yeah, exactly. How so many of us are still in the basics. I really like what you said, how it reflects the current space in the market. And we certainly see that with the co-creation of value. We certainly see that with value streams instead of thinking about service end to end, which both have value, of course. And do you get the sense that some people are stuck, like they're not able to actually get to the point where they're realizing the benefits of ITIL v4 and that agile, like project teams across the organization?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a couple of things that are happening. One is that the basics that we need to focus on, in many cases, are just not there. We still see organizations, even those organizations who are struggling with things like configuration management databases or service definitions. And I did a lot of thinking as to why that would be the case, because ITIL has always been around, you need a CMDB to focus on those things that are important to manage. Not on everything, but on those things that are important to manage. And yet we see CMDB tools going and trying to find out every piece of information about every device that's out there on the network, and then spending a lot of time capturing information about devices that are not on the network or don't have a network footprint. And we tend to miss the point of that. So a lot of it, I think, comes from, I don't know what I have to record because I don't know who's going to potentially be using it. So let's err on the side of let's record too much rather than too little. I think that's part of it. I think another part of it is that every time a new generation of tools comes out, that generation of tools takes care of some problems that existed, some limitations that existed before they came out. And I think that our expectation is that the next generation of tools that comes out is going to solve some of these basic building blocks. So I don't have to worry about them. They will be taken care of in the next generation of tools. The only problem is they're not.
Yeah.
Because the next generation of tools assumes that you've taken care of these basic building blocks. And now what's happened as a result of that is something very interesting. So we see a lot of tools really got really advanced in terms of help desks and service desks and incident management and problem management and change management. And what we found happening is that some strides were made in those areas. And we have specialized groups emerging in those areas that are now separate to the rest of service management. And so we have these support teams. Service support is now an entity in and of itself. Many people don't even think that they're related to service management. Service management's a different set of disciplines. Like, where did that come from? But there it is. And we have another one. IT asset management is now the separate thing off on its own. Another one is IT financial management. That's kind of off on its own. And really what we need to do is look at ways of bringing all of these together because they're all part of the same picture. And the interesting thing is they all depend on the very same basics. So an example, I was at an IT Financial Management Association conference a few weeks ago. And one of the most common problems that all of the financial managers had is they were told they need to be able to allocate costs to services. And one of the biggest issues they have is that there is no consistent service catalog within their organization. So we have some service catalogs that are being set up for applications. We have some that are set up for infrastructure services like servers, network access, so on and so forth. But the map of services from the back office through to the front of house where the business activity is happening, that has not been completed. And so the best I can do is tell you where you're spending money on these devices or these technical services. Well, that doesn't really help because if the only thing you can do is say, here's how much money you're spending, then the person who's budgeted is going to turn around and say, how can I reduce my budget? Not how can I increase my value? How can I generate more revenue? Or how can I make more customers happy? It's how can I save money? Because that's the only thing you're reporting to me.
Yeah.
So this basic of a service catalog of end-to-end services, and if you want to even go further, of a value chain or value stream, it's missing. And we had hoped that the products would put that in place, but the products don't do it automatically. What they do is they'll tell you, oh, these users are using this database. Great. But what does that actually mean? What are those users actually doing? Are they checking customers out? Are they admitting patients into a hospital? That link is not being made.
Yeah.
And that is Service Management 101.
Exactly.
It's been there all along, and yet we're still struggling with some of these basics.
Yeah.
So, that's my understanding.
I'm so glad to have you on, David. I think you've highlighted a point that is unspoken that people just don't realize. And we used to realize it in the 90s and even into the 2000s when people were starting to discover ITIL and they were starting to purchase tools to handle IT operations. And we were constantly preaching, the tool is not going to do it for you. You need to understand your processes and then implement that into the tool. Implement your processes as you need them into the tool. And now we've reached these people who have been live in tools and with their processes and slowly adding maturity. And we're not actually maturing. We're continuing to say, okay, what is the next? We're looking for that next innovation. We're looking for that next iteration and how can we do better and how can we operate better? But we're not doing the disciplined, hard approach of going back and saying, how do I do demand management? How am I actually going to do service costing? How do I do ITBM? And I think you've highlighted a great point there.
Yeah, and interesting. So we were working on this cloud book that was produced as part of ITIL, how to acquire and manage cloud services. And in researching for that, we looked at where are the biggest problems with cloud. And one of the biggest problems is this inability to estimate. And we often perceive that therefore the cloud is costing us more than we thought it would, or it's costing us differently, or now it's OPEX and it was CAPEX and we don't know how to deal with that, whatever the case is. But what was interesting is one of the major causes of us not being able to predict cost was because we cannot predict workloads. Of course, in the cloud, a workload equals dollars. The more you do, the more you pay. And this was interesting to me because even since ITIL version 1, and in fact, even before ITIL, because this existed even before that, was this discipline called workload management. And a lot of people say, we do workload management. We look at the workload on a server and it's using X amount of memory, X amount of whatever resource, and you just project it forward over the next year. That's what your workload is going to be. That isn't workload management at all. What that is utilization or performance of a server. Workload management says a user does this kind of thing, and when they do it, it uses these resources. They're going to do it this many times in these months or weeks or days. And when they do that, this is going to be the demand on this particular system or whatever it is. Now, if you have that information, you can translate it into a cloud service and say, based on user activity and business activity, based on the marketing activity that's going on, the sales activity, the production activity, I can predict that these users who do these things are going to need Y amount of these resources in the cloud. And I can then reliably predict what the cost is going to be. But we lost that discipline. Somewhere along the line, it kind of, well, that's not service management. It is. It's
It really
absolutely critical component of service management, but it's hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we focus on the stuff that's more tangible, that's more short-term, that we can show a real return on in the short term. Workload management is not one of those things. It's one of those things that you only know that it's missing when it's missing. Right?
Yeah.
It's not one of those, well, we implemented workload management and therefore we earned the company an extra 5% in revenue. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
But do you notice it when you get your cloud forecast wrong?
Oh, yeah.
And you're spending 15% over budget on your services, then it becomes a real issue.
Yeah, exactly. How do you scale up when you need to scale up, and you need to do it in a balanced way so that your services aren't costing more than your company is producing?
That's exactly right. And so for me, I think that we in the industry really need to be encouraging this, not a back to basics, but let's revisit the basics and update them in the context of what we're trying to do today. They don't need a whole lot of translation, to be honest. They're pretty high level. You can apply them pretty easily across multiple different environments. But we've got to do it consciously. Just assume that the tools are going to do it for us, because they don't.
Yeah, exactly. Back to the way that we used to think that it was going to just bring us this maturity. We can't depend on them now to do that either. So how can we raise up service management? How can we empower service managers to do this, right? Because we don't have necessarily staff that's doing this. Is it stuff I'm going to do on my own free time? How am I going to get back to the basics?
I think there's a lot of different things that kind of go through my mind when you ask a question like that. So first of all, the people are there. It's just for some reason they now perceive that they're not part of service management. So if I'm a capacity manager, I'm part of operations. That's not service management. Service management is those guys who are doing support or whatever the case is, but I'm not service management anymore. Actually, you're very much part of service management. So we really need to champion the role of service management within organizations. And I think we've lost that a little bit. Back in the days when ITIL was the main thing and everybody talked about what ITIL says and so on, it almost became a kind of a cult or a religion. Where ITIL says, therefore you have to. It was never intended to do that, and it shouldn't have done that, but that's how it became. So we almost discredited the use of ITIL to some extent, because some people just took it way overboard. And then along comes a number of other things, Agile, DevOps, and they're fantastic, by the way. They've brought some really good perspectives and insights into the industry, but any of the books that you read will say to do this effectively in the operations environment, you really have to have a good understanding of service management.
Yes.
So I remember also being part of IT Service Management Forum. And very few people in the IT service management want to take a stand and say, we need a rallying point. And that rallying point is ITIL. What they would say is, we've got ITIL, but whatever you guys want to use, just come in. So I really think the industry needs a good, strong rallying point again. And I don't really care what it is, but it needs to champion the cause of the service manager. The service manager is a critical component of any organization. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing DevOps, Agile, ITIL, SAFe, COBIT, doesn't matter. Service management incorporates a bunch of disciplines that are absolutely essential for an IT environment to function effectively, to contribute value to its organization. And I don't know where that's going to come from. I, for one, will be championing the cause of the service manager and the profession of the service manager. One of the ways I'm going to do that is by launching a series of short videos and articles around basic concepts. What is a service? Interestingly, we finished a project. Actually, it was 3 or 4 projects, and they were around cost modeling. And as part of the project, key stakeholders were interviewed. And I want to say there were about 45 workshops in total. 1-hour sessions in which we said, What are the services that you provide, and how do you cost them, and so on? And in over 30 of those meetings, the one question that was asked consistently was, what do you mean by service? I don't believe it's that people don't know what a service is.
No.
I believe that's what's happened is that there have become so many different definitions of what we mean by a service that people, every time we have a discussion around service, people feel they need to clarify. What do you mean by service? And do you mean server provisioning? Or do you actually mean what we deliver to our end customers? Or do you mean something else along that value stream? And I think we've got to equip people with the language that is consistent, that can be used here. Service management always had a consistent definition of what a service is, and it had some very clear examples of what that meant and what it was not. So, for example, the activities that I perform when I provide that service are not in and of themselves services.
Right.
They're my job. And so what I want to do is just to create a series of short videos. What is a service? What is a product? What is the difference between the two? What is service management? What's included? What's not included? These kind of subjects, I think it's time for us to revisit them and to talk about them, and for service managers not to be ashamed and stand up and say, I know we've got DevOps and I'm all for DevOps, but I'm a service manager and I'm proud of that fact. And this is what I contribute to the discussion.
Exactly. Pair with, not against another framework or another idea or another way of working.
Oh, absolutely.
Just give them the honor that they deserve.
Yeah, I think many of us went through that phase of looking at DevOps as it became more and more popular and saying, oh, I need to redefine my career to become DevOps. Yes, I needed to redefine my career, but not to become DevOps, but to figure out how that works with me as a service manager, or how I as a service manager work within an environment where DevOps is becoming a very important driver within my organization.
Yeah.
But instead of being embarrassed about saying I'm a service manager, no, there's something really cool about being a service manager. And I'm very proud to be one still after, I won't say how many years.
Yeah, I love that. It really, you've hit the nail on the head, David. We went through this phase where people would roll their eyes and say, oh, he's one of those ITIL guys, or oh, he's the change manager and he's stopping our progress. We really need to understand and realize the benefit that service management provides and pair with those people to understand where are the gaps, where are the opportunities to keep our velocity up and to serve the needs of those teams while also serving the needs of a mature service management organization, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And by all means, let's own our mistakes.
Bingo.
Yes, we did hold changes up.
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes we were an obstacle to growth because we were a little bit behind the times. Let's own that.
Bingo.
Let's figure out how that works today. In a highly innovative environment, change management is going to look very different to the change management that was introduced in mainframe days.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we make that happen? How do we support that? Let's own our limitations of the past. And let's figure out how to work past them. But let's not drop change management.
Right.
Or change enablement, as it's now called.
Yeah, exactly. Fit for purpose. David, thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Thank you for being a guest. Where can people connect? Where can they learn more?
LinkedIn is the easiest place to find me. There's a lot of David Cannons, but if you put David Cannon, ITSM, you'll find me without any problem. That's the easiest place to connect. If you don't have LinkedIn or not on LinkedIn, you can always shoot me an email at dcannon@nfiniti3.com.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Matt. Really great to be here with you.
And for our audience, thanks for hitting play. I'll see you around the way. I'm your host, Matt Barron. You can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn as Matt Barron. Don't forget to post a review or send feedback. Subscribe to Ticket Volume on your favorite podcast platforms. And thank you for listening to Ticket Volume, a podcast powered by InvGate.